When I pulled that old wooden box out of the bottom drawer of my grandfather's cupboard, I had no idea it held anything more than 5 simple coins, but it held the biggest secret of his whole life. On top of the box was a small paper, and in his shaky handwriting it said, "When I am gone, count them. Every coin is a place, every place is a time, and every time is a broken promise you must complete." At first I thought it was just an old man's sentimental note. But over the next 3 weeks, what I found, what I heard, and what I understood changed the way I saw my grandfather forever. My grandfather, Rashid Ahmed, was a retired railway engineer who had spent the last 30 years of his career traveling back and forth to the United States for training programs. 3 days after he passed away, while the whole house was still in mourning, my aunt called me aside and said, "Your grandfather wanted you to have something. He said it should only go to you, no one else." The box was light. Inside was an old velvet pouch, and inside that were 5 American quarter dollars. At first glance, they looked completely ordinary, each one showing George Washington's face on the front. But the back of each coin was different, a wreath with a peach in the middle, and Georgia 1788 written around it. The Statue of Liberty, with New York 1788 and Gateway to Freedom, a mountain road with a tunnel marked Blue Ridge Parkway, North Carolina. An old bear tree, with the Charter Oak and Connecticut 1788 written beneath it. A covered wagon, sun rays, and a rock formation called Chimney Rock, with Nebraska 1867 above it. I thought, this is just a coin collection. But when I turned the box over, there was another piece of paper stuck underneath. A rough hand-drawn map with 5 places circled: Georgia, New York, North Carolina, Connecticut, Nebraska. And below that, in small letters, "The order is wrong. Find the right order, and the secret will open." I couldn't sleep that night. I went into his room and found his old diary, the one he always kept under his pillow. The first page was dated 1987, the year he first went to the U.S., on a railway training program sponsored by the State Department. As I read further, I realized he hadn't gone alone for training only. He had a close friend there, Daniel Rahman, who was in the same program. During breaks, the two of them traveled by car across several American states, from Georgia all the way to Nebraska. One page said, "Today Daniel made me promise something. He said if one of us ever failed to make it back home, the other must carry a token to his family. So we decided that every place we visited together, we would each keep a coin from that state. 5 places, 5 coins each, and a secret only the 2 of us would know." My heart was pounding. Daniel Rahman, a name I had never heard before. No one in the family had ever mentioned him. The next few pages revealed something my grandfather had probably never told anyone. In 1999, while the 2 of them were visiting state parks in Georgia and Connecticut, there was a road accident. Daniel survived, but afterward his immigration papers got tangled up so badly that he lost his visa status and could never travel home again. He stayed on in America quietly, too ashamed to contact his family and put them through the pain of his story. My grandfather had written, "I tried so hard to find Daniel. Every time work took me back to America, I stopped in the places we had visited together. In New York in 2001, I bought a coin identical to the ones we'd once planned. In North Carolina in 2015, when the Blue Ridge Parkway coin came out, I made a special trip there. The Nebraska one from 2006, I got there too. Every single time I hoped, maybe this time I'll find Daniel." Reading this, I understood these weren't just collector's coins. They were 5 journeys, 5 attempts, markers of an unfinished promise. The next morning, I took out the old map again. It said, "The order is wrong. Find the right order." I first arranged the coins by year. Georgia, 1999. Connecticut, 1999. New York, 2001. Nebraska, 2006. North Carolina, 2015. But when I laid this order over the map, nothing special appeared, just a straight line running from east to west across America. No hidden message. Then I remembered, the diary said each coin was bought at the exact time he was searching for Daniel. Maybe the order wasn't about years at all. Maybe it followed the story of their friendship, from the first meeting to the last. Reading further in the diary, I found the real sequence. The 2 friends first went to Georgia, where they made their original promise. Then Connecticut, where the accident happened. Then my grandfather went alone to New York, where he first heard a rumor that Danielle might still be alive. Then he received an old letter in Nebraska, sent through a mutual friend of Danielle's. And finally, North Carolina, where, in 2015, my grandfather and Danielle met one last time. When I laid this order over the map, the 5 marked points connected into an arrow, pointing straight to a 6th location, written tiny in the corner of the map, Charlotte, North Carolina, Oak Street Post Office, Box 214. I told my aunt everything. At first she didn't believe it, but when I showed her the diary, her eyes filled with tears. She said, "Your grandfather always said he had one unfinished task. We thought he meant something about work. We contacted the North Carolina Post Office. Easy enough these days through email and international calls. Box 214 was still registered, but under a different name, Zane Raymond, Danielle's son, who had kept using the same box after his father's death, hoping a letter would arrive someday. When we spoke to Zane, he told us his father, Danielle Raymond, had met a Pakistani engineer in Charlotte. One last time in 2015, the same year the North Carolina coin was released. He called him Rashid. After that meeting, Danielle told his son, "Today I met my oldest friend. We had split 5 coins long ago. 3 stayed with me, 2 with him. If anything ever happens to me, remember, collect the coins, find the right order, and go to the place where we made our very first promise." Zion sent us the other 2 coins his father had kept, matching Georgia and Connecticut coins, just like my grandfather's, though a little more worn, as if they had spent years riding in someone's pocket rather than sitting safely in a box. Now we had 10 coins in total, 5 from my grandfather, 5 from Danielle's son. When we placed them together, something interesting stood out. In each matching pair, one coin was worn smooth and the other looked almost new, as if one had been carried daily, and the other kept somewhere safe, a memory box, untouched. Zion told us his father's final wish was that, if these coins were ever reunited, they should be taken back to Georgia, where it all began, and buried together in a small park there, so their friendship would live on in the earth itself, not locked away in a drawer. 3 months later, Zane and I were able to travel to Georgia together. We went to the park mentioned in the diary, a small garden on the edge of Savannah, lined with peach trees just like the coin that read Wisdom, Justice, Moderation. We dug a small hole and placed all 10 coins inside a small metal box, then buried it in the ground. Above it we placed a small plaque with both their names, Rashid Ahmed and Danielle Rehman, 2 friends, 10 coins, 1 unfinished promise finally kept. Standing there, Zane turned to me and said, "You know, I always thought my father was talking about some lost treasure, but the treasure was never gold, it was this friendship." I didn't say anything. I just remembered the final page of the diary, which I had read right before the trip. If my grandchild is reading this, know this: the most precious thing in life is not money or any object, but the promises we make to the people we love. I could never fully find Danielle in my lifetime, but if you've read this story all the way through, it means the promise was finally kept. Thank you, my child, for giving me the peace I could never give myself. Even now, when I look at those 5 American state quarters, Georgia's Peach, New York's Statue of Liberty, North Carolina's Mountain Road, Connecticut's Old Tree, and Nebraska's Covered Wagon, they are no longer just coins to me. Each coin was a moment in time. Each place was a step in a journey, and the whole story was a friendship that turned out stronger than death itself. Because even after being buried in the ground, it stayed alive in words, in paper, and now, in this story. Sometimes we think old things and old coins, old letters, old diaries, and are just clutter. But sometimes they hold an entire life inside them, waiting quietly until someone is willing to really look. When I came back from Georgia, the house felt different. Not sad different, quiet different. Like something that had been sitting, heavy on the walls for years, had finally been let out. My aunt asked me 100 questions the day I landed. What was Zane like? Did the park still have peach trees? Did I take pictures of the plaque? I answered all of them. But the question that stayed in my head was one nobody asked out loud. Why had my grandfather never told any of us about Danielle, not even once in almost 40 years? I went back to the diary that night, past the pages I had already read, into entries I had skipped because they looked ordinary. Grocery lists, train schedules, notes about his knees hurting in winter. But tucked between two boring pages I found this. I did not tell the family because shame is a strange thing. I was ashamed that I could not bring my friend home. I was ashamed that I could not even tell his family the truth for so many years, because I did not know if he wanted them to know. A man's silence is sometimes not coldness. Sometimes it is just him carrying something heavy alone, because he does not know how to put it down without breaking something else. I read that line 3 times. I understood suddenly why he had waited until his own death to hand this over. He wasn't hiding a secret from us. He was protecting Danielle's dignity, right up until it was safe to let it go. A few weeks later, Zane called me. He said his mother, Danielle's wife, who had passed away years before, Danielle himself, used to tell him a strange bedtime story when he was small. A story about the man from far away, a friend his father talked about only late at night, when he thought no one was listening. Zayn told me, I used to think it was just a story parents make up to put kids to sleep. A fairy tale. I never thought Rashid was a real man walking around in Pakistan, still looking for my father decades later. He told me something new too. Something my grandfather's diary hadn't captured. After the accident in Connecticut, Danielle had spent almost 2 years doing small jobs, moving from state to state, terrified that if he asked for help from the Pakistani embassy, his family back home would be told the full truth, and it would break their hearts. He worked in a small hardware store in Ohio for a while, then a bakery in Virginia. He learned to fix bicycles. He learned to speak with almost no accent, just to blend in and avoid questions. He was always waiting for the right moment to come home, Zayn said. But the right moment never came. And after a while, I think he stopped believing it would. I sat with that for a long time after the call ended. It made the coins feel heavier in my hands than metal should ever feel. Zayn also gave me more details about that final meeting in 2015, the one my grandfather's diary only mentioned briefly. It happened almost by accident. My grandfather was in North Carolina for a short engineering conference, walking along a street near his hotel, when he saw a man fixing an old bicycle outside a small repair shop. Something about the way the man tilted his head while working reminded him instantly of college days, decades earlier back home. He said Danielle's name out loud, almost as a question, not expecting an answer. The man looked up. For a few seconds, neither of them said anything. Then Danielle simply said, "You still walk with your left foot turned out a little. I always used to tease you about that." They sat outside that repair shop until it got dark. My grandfather offered right there to help him sort out his papers, to help him come home even after all those years. But Danielle refused. He said too much time had passed. He said his children barely knew Pakistan. His life was built here now, brick by brick, and going back would only unbuild everything he had quietly rebuilt for himself. But he did ask for one thing. He asked my grandfather to keep their old promise. The coins, the 5 states, the meaning behind them, and to make sure that someday someone would understand the story, even if it was long after both of them were gone. That is exactly what happened. just not the way either of them expected. After the trip to Georgia, something unusual started happening. Zane and I began talking almost every week. At first it was just updates, how the plaque looked after the rain, whether the peach trees were doing well that season. Slowly it became something more like family. He sent me old photographs of Danielle, from the years he spent in America, working at the bakery, fixing bicycles, standing awkwardly at a small, local fair holding a paper plate of food he clearly wasn't used to eating. In every photo, there was something familiar in his expression, the same slightly tired, slightly amused look my grandfather used to have in his old railway photos. I sent Zane photos too. My grandfather in his railway uniform, standing proudly beside an old steam engine, and later, gray-haired, sitting quietly on our veranda with a cup of tea, looking out at nothing in particular. Zane wrote back, "That's exactly how my father used to sit too. Same posture. Strange, isn't it? How two men who grew up on opposite sides of the world end up sitting the same way when they're thinking about someone they've lost." We started planning something bigger, not just a private visit to Georgia, but a small gathering, a way to properly close the story together, instead of each of us carrying half of it alone the way our fathers had. A year after the first trip, both families went back to that same small park in Georgia. This time it wasn't just me and Zane. My aunt came. Zane's two children came, wide-eyed and a little confused about why everyone was crying near a peach tree. We brought fresh flowers, and we brought one more coin, a brand new one bought that same year. To add on top of the buried box is a small marker of everyone who had come after. Standing there, my aunt said something I will never forget. She said, "Grief makes people quiet, but it doesn't make them forget. Your grandfather was quiet for 40 years. Not because he forgot Danielle, but because he never stopped thinking about him, not even for a single day." Zane's older daughter, who was maybe 10 years old, asked a simple question that somehow summed up the whole story better than either of us adults could. She asked, "So the coins weren't really about money at all?" Zane smiled and said, "No, they were about keeping a promise, even when it takes a very long time." Looking back now, I think about how easily this story could have disappeared completely if my grandfather had thrown away that old velvet pouch, if Zane had given up on that post office box after a few quiet years, if either family had decided the past was too painful to dig up. But they didn't, and because of that, something almost 40 years old finally found its ending. I still think about that first note, the one taped to the box. Every coin is a place. Every place is a time. And every time is a broken promise you must complete. I used to think it sounded a little dramatic, the kind of thing people write in old letters just for effect. Now I understand it was the plain truth. My grandfather wasn't just collecting quarters from different states. He was quietly building a bridge coin by coin, year by year, hoping someone on the other end of his life would one day walk across it and finish what he couldn't. We did. Zine and I still talk often. Our children are growing up already knowing this story, the way we never got to know it until it was almost too late. And every time I see a state quarter now, any state, any year, I don't see a coin. I see two young men sitting somewhere in Georgia in 1987, making a promise neither of them could keep in their own lifetime, but one that eventually, somehow found its way home.